Hello everybody, my name is Brian McGann. I'm one of the instructors and authors here at INE. And in this video, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the new rack scheduling system that goes along with the CCIE Service Provider version 3.0 blueprint. So here I have the INE.com webpage up, and from the main page, I'm going to go up to the Members tab. From here, normally you would get a login box that you need to type your login and password. In this case, I'm already logged in, so it's bringing me right to the main dashboard. Now, in the case of the service provider rack rentals, they are going to be using the physical topology that is based on the CCIE Service Provider version 3 workbook. So if you go under the workbook tab and then down to Service Provider version 3.0, click on the download action. And in this case, I want to briefly look at the workbook and the diagrams. If we look at the actual workbook, in the introductory section, one of the first things that it talks about is the topology information, which this is the physical topology that's going to be used for the rack rentals. It's made up of 6 routers that are 7200s, 2 routers that are 2600s, 2 iOS XR instances, then a Catalyst ME3400 switch and a Catalyst 3550 switch. What is most important out of this first section, other than the devices, the iOS versions, is what is the physical topology. So when you're building a particular lab scenario and you are referencing the logical diagram, you're going to need to revert back to this physical wiring diagram to figure out how are the routers actually plugged into each other. So in this case, we see that all the routers go to the first switch on their first Ethernet port. They go to the second switch on their second Ethernet port, and then the iOS XR instances have some back-to-back Ethernets. Then we have a couple back-to-back serials and a back-to-back SONET interface or packet over SONET interface between the XR instances. So next, if we go back to the members page and go to the Rack Rentals tab, I want to go to Service Provider version 3 and click on Schedule, and this is going to bring up our new scheduling system. Now currently this is only for service provider, but in the near future this is going to be extended to the other tracks for routing and switching, for voice and security, which gives a little bit more flexibility over the current system that we're using. And for those of you that have used our rack rental system before, the first thing that you're going to notice here is that the sessions are now broken down into 3-hour blocks as opposed to 6-hour blocks. So effectively, it's going to be the same thing if you were to book 2 sessions back to back, but now you have a little bit more granularity over the particular sessions that you want to choose. So here we can see today is Friday, April 27th. Right now I have one of the racks currently booked out for the entire day. But if I wanted to schedule an additional session, I can see the conversion between the US West Coast time, which right now is GMT -7, which is what the scheduler's time is based off of, and then my local time, which is GMT -5, which is my central time here in Chicago. So if I were to hover over one of these sessions and click on it, we can see the time zone conversion. There's this little pop-up here that says this is talking about 8 a.m. Central Time, which is my local time, and you can also see this conversion on the column to the left of the scheduler. So you simply choose whatever particular slots that you want and click on Schedule Labs. Now right now for service provider, there's no cost associated with this because the scheduler is still in beta testing. But normally what you would see is that when you click on these individual slots, it's going to tell you how many tokens that it's going to cost in order to actually schedule that session. So you click on Schedule the Labs. We can see here for Sunday 4/29, I have 2 sessions scheduled back to back. So what this means is that the rack system is not going to run a rack reset or run the scripts to clear off the configurations between these 2 sessions. So if I wanted, let's say, 12 hours consecutively of rack time, I just need to click all those slots to queue them up. Now I have a consecutive session that is going to be for this time period. Now if you want to unschedule or drop a section, you simply need to click on it. It says, do you want to delete this event? You click delete and then it's gone from the scheduler. So once you're done with this, if you close the scheduler and refresh this page under the Rack Rentals tab, it's then going to list there what are the current sessions that I have scheduled. So from here, we would want to know what's the time of the session that's scheduled. In this case, I have a current one for Friday the 27th. Then 4 other sessions that I scheduled on Saturday, Sunday, and the Sunday session actually shows that it's 3 different sessions here, and that's because I scheduled them at separate times. So if I wanted this to be one consecutive session, what I would need to do is to go back to the scheduler, delete these events, then once they're all gone, simply add them back all at once. And you can see on the left now it says that my session is for Sunday for 12 hours. Schedule it, and then this should show up as one contiguous block. So if you do want more than one session at a time, you need to make sure that when you go back to the rack rental page and you refresh this, that it shows up as one single session, not as multiple sessions. If it shows up as multiple sessions, it means that the rack is going to reset in between them. Now for an individual one session slot, as I mentioned, it's 3 hours long, but at the end of this, there's a half an hour of scripting that the system needs to go through in order to delete your old configurations and then get the rack ready for the next person that's coming up. Now, if you do schedule more than one session at a time, it means that that half hour of inter-session, what we call it, is only going to run once. So this means that if you schedule just one session, you're going to have 2.5 hours of usable time. If you were to schedule 2 back-to-back sessions so that you have a 6-hour window, it means that you're going to have 5.5 hours of usable time, because that half-hour inter-session is only going to run once at the very end. Now from here, once you have your sessions scheduled, you want to go to the control panel. And from here, this is where you're going to control what particular type of initial configurations that you want to load. Then in the near future, we're going to add other functionality to this in order to save your configurations that are currently on the rack. And then while your session is currently running, to load configurations similar to the previous control panels that we have for the routing and switching racks. But for right now, you can see that by default, when you start the rack session, it's going to start with blank configurations. The scripting system is going to erase all the configs. If you wanted to load a specific initial config from the workbook, you would just choose it from this dropdown. So for example, if I want to do the MPLS Traffic Engineering Labs with OSPF, just click that and click Save. And then the next time I click the dropdown, it's going to show that that one was highlighted. So now when that session starts, it's going to preload those initial configurations, and you're not going to have to spend additional time once the session starts to actually load those configs. So at exactly 6 a.m. when I log into the rack tomorrow, then those configs are going to be preloaded for me. So the next step then would be to actually access the equipment. So just like the other racks, it's going to be regular telnet over the internet, and the specific host that we are telnetting to is going to be racks.ine.com. So you need some sort of terminal software, whether this is just your command line telnet or PuTTY or secure CRT. It's really up to your personal preference. In this case, I'm going to be using secure CRT. So from here, I need 2 pieces of information. I need to know what is the username for logging in and what is the password. Okay, in this case, the username is sprack2 and the password is NOOB. So if I were then to telnet to the hostname racks.ine.com at regular port 23, I should see the username prompt come up here. I'm going to type in sprack2. The user or the password is NOOB, which is going to be a random password every time. It's going to bring up the main menu for accessing the equipment. So in the previous sessions with our routing and switching racks or security racks, you had an individual login on a per device basis. In this case, with the new scheduler, there's a single login. Then it's going to pop up this menu and you choose what particular device you want to connect to, or whether you want to reboot one of the routers through the power controller if you need to clear the lines. Or in this case, one of the additional features for the SP racks is to do a password recovery on the iOS XR instances. So let's say, for example, I want to connect to router 1. I just enter 1 and hit return. That's going to drop me off at the console of router 1. If I now want to open an additional session, let's say to router 2, I then just open a new telnet window to racks.ine.com. Same login, so this is going to be sprack2. Password is NOOB. I get to the same menu. Now I just enter 2 hit carriage return in order to get to router 2. So now I can have multiple windows open at the same time for my different sessions. And then if I wanted to, in Secure CRT, I could rename these to say this one is router 2, and the first one here is router 1. So pretty straightforward for connecting to the devices. Okay, the other potential thing you would want to do here is that if for some reason your telnet session gets hung and you are unable to telnet to the router, so let's say I tried to connect to router 1, but I already have a session open, it's going to tell me that the line is in use. I need to use the clear line portion of the menu in order to connect to router 1. So if you hit return, it's just going to go back to the menu. I would then hit C for the clear line menu. Then from here, I could disconnect the lines, the console sessions of the individual routers, or if I wanted to, I could clear all of them consecutively. So if I were to hit 1 and return, if you'll notice in the upper left there, that clears the session out to router 1 that I previously had connected. Now, the other thing that you would want to know is for connecting to the iOS XR instances, even when you're connecting from the console, it's always going to challenge you for password authentication. So when I connect to XR1, which is going to be session number 9 here, if the console session is not already logged in, so if I were to exit out of the console, normally what you're going to see here is the username prompt again. So if you were to hit return a couple times, and eventually it's going to say authentication failed, you should get this message that is showing that we are actually connected to the iOS XR instance. This is not the login authentication for the main rack system. So from here, the iOS XR instances will have default username and passwords of XR1 and the lowercase password Cisco, or in the case of XR2, if I were to go back to the main menu, then to telnet to XR2, if it's asking me for login information, this should be XR2 with the password Cisco. And then when you're looking at the configuration, if I were to show run section username, or show run username, I should say, this is going to be basically the root user for accessing this particular instance of iOS XR. So you want to make sure not to delete this user. If you do accidentally delete the user, then you're going to need to do password recovery, because this is a local user stored in the configuration, just like if you were to have local usernames and passwords in regular iOS. So if the config were to get deleted, if I were to go to global config and say commit replace, which is going to effectively replace the running config with nothing, so I'm committing it to a default config. Then I were to look at the show run, we could see the configuration is blank now, so that username is no longer there. Now at this point, if I were to exit out of the console, the username XR2 is no longer in the local configuration. So eventually it's going to just keep saying that authentication has failed here. Now in this case, what you want to do is to get back to this prompt where it says press return to get started, hit return once so that the username prompt comes up, then telnet to the menu again. If I were to telnet to racks.ini.com, log in as sprack2 with my same password. I now want to hit X for the iOS XR password recovery menu, and in this case I'm trying to recover XR2's password. And generally it's going to take about 30 seconds or so for the script to go in to add the username back and then to exit out of the system. But the key here is that if you do lock yourself out, it's not actually going to change anything in the config other than adding that user back in. So you don't need to worry about it deleting your configuration. The only thing it's logging in with, or the only thing it's doing, is logging in with the overall admin login, adding that user XR2 back, and then exiting out. Okay, so you could see that it cleared my line to XR2. Now if I try to reconnect, so 10 is to telnet to XR2. If I now log in with XR2 and the password Cisco, I should be able to get authenticated. And if I now look at the show run output, the only other thing that the script is adding here is just this username back. And they would want to be in the group root-lr, which basically means that they can make any changes to the configuration for this particular instance of XR. So thank you everyone for watching this video on how to use the new rack scheduling system. If you do run into any problems with the scheduler or just have general questions, when you go back to the main member site, you'll see that on the left-hand portion of the screen, there is a section here to submit feedback, and then that does go into our ticketing queue, and you will get a follow-up afterwards. So thanks again for watching, and good luck in your studies, everyone.